The desert of Kar-Ren. The twin suns of Kar-Ren beat down on Kyle Reed, relentless and unyielding. The desert stretched out before him, vast and unforgiving, a landscape of endless crimson dunes that shimmered with the heat. The air was thick with the stench of sand and blistering dryness, and Kyle's cracked lips stung with every breath. His throat felt like it had been scraped raw by the endless hours of exposure to the harsh winds and scorching heat. It had been 6 days since the crash. 6 days of walking, of trying to survive alone on a planet that had no mercy, no compassion for the weak. His cargo ship, the Albatross, had been torn to pieces when the pirates attacked. He had been fortunate to escape with his life, but his crew, they were scattered, lost in the wreckage somewhere out in the endless sea of sand. He couldn't think about it. Not now. Anyone copy? Kyle called into his communicator, his voice hoarse, barely audible above the static. The radio crackled, a few faint beeps and whines, but no response. His fingers gripped the device tightly, pressing it to his ear in a futile attempt to catch some semblance of a signal. He waited, but the only reply was the whisper of the wind. The radio was as dead as his hope. He glanced down at his half-empty water canteen. It had barely enough for one more drink, and he knew that would have to last him until he found his crew, or until his legs gave out beneath him. He tried not to think about the long stretches of desert that still lay ahead, the promise of nothing but more loneliness and unrelenting heat. What could he do? He couldn't waste his last supplies on a hopeless journey. He had to find his crew, or at least something that could help him get off this godforsaken rock. Kyle pulled his fabric shield tighter around his neck, shielding himself from the searing rays of the twin suns. His mind was elsewhere, focused on his next move, but his body was a constant reminder of the toll this planet was taking on him. Parched lips, a growing headache, and aching muscles that screamed for rest. His hands were raw, his boots filled with sand that scraped at his skin. Still, he pressed on. As the afternoon wore on, the temperature began to drop rapidly. Kyle noticed the sudden change, the air shifting from the oppressive heat to a biting cold that sank into his bones. The planet was a harsh master, shifting from scorching to freezing in an instant. He climbed a particularly steep dune and paused at its peak, his muscles burning from the effort, his breath coming in labored gasps. He glanced around, taking in the vast desert stretching endlessly in every direction. The wreckage of the Albatross was miles behind him, and ahead there was nothing but more sand, more desolation. Kyle looked out across the horizon, his eyes straining against the burning brightness. In the distance, near a jagged outcrop of rock, he saw something. Movement. At first, he wasn't sure if it was a trick of the heat, but then it happened again. Something was moving at the edge of his vision, near the rocks. A figure. It was too far to make out any details, but the way it moved caught his attention. It wasn't like anything he had seen on this planet. It was far too graceful, too fluid, for a human. Kyle froze, dropping low against the sand, instinctively pressing his body into the cooling dunes. His heart rate spiked. Was it another survivor, or had he stumbled upon something far more dangerous? His fingers went instinctively to the sidearm on his hip, but as he fumbled for it, he realized the futility of it. A simple gun wouldn't be enough for whatever this was. He squinted, trying to get a better view. The figure moved again, and this time, it was closer. Tall and lithe, it was a being that stood out starkly against the horizon. Its skin gleamed under the fading light, a deep cobalt blue that seemed to shimmer as it moved. Kyle's eyes widened with realization. It wasn't human. The being's posture was predatory, and its movements were precise, like an apex predator stalking its prey. Kyle hesitated. He had heard rumors about the native species of Kar-Ren, but he hadn't expected to see one, especially not so soon. Stories of alien monsters roamed freely in the cargo lanes, but the idea of encountering one face-to-face was far less comforting. The figure paused, as if sensing his presence. Kyle's breath caught in his chest. For a moment, nothing happened, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, without warning, the alien moved again, this time with speed and precision that took Kyle by surprise. From behind its back, it pulled the weapon, a long bone-white spear, its edges gleaming dangerously in the fading light. Kyle's body tensed. This wasn't just an encounter, it was a confrontation. The alien woman took a few long strides toward him, her spear raised, and her golden eyes locked on his position. She looked deadly, and her focus was entirely on him. "Hell," Kyle muttered under his breath. He slowly rose to his feet, raising his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "I'm not looking for trouble," he called out, his voice hoarse. He could only hope that the alien understood enough to let him live. The alien didn't respond with words but with action. She jabbed the spear toward him, the sharp tip slicing through the air with deadly precision. She didn't hesitate, didn't pause to wait for his next move. Instead, she launched herself forward, closing the gap with terrifying speed. Kyle didn't have time to react. Instinctively, he reached out with his hand, and as the spear hurtled toward him, he caught it by the shaft in one smooth motion. The force of the impact nearly knocked him off balance, but his grip held firm. The alien warrior stopped abruptly, her golden eyes wide with disbelief. She had expected to impale him, to finish him off in one swift motion, but instead, Kyle had caught her spear. His breath came in short bursts as he stared back at her, equally stunned. The alien took a step back, her posture shifting from aggression to something more uncertain. She was clearly shocked, but she was not giving up. The fight was far from over. Kyle gripped the spear, his heart pounding in his chest. The ancient laws of the universe were clear. If a human caught the spear of an alien warrior in combat, the laws of fate had already been sealed. By tradition, the alien warrior was now bound to him, forever. As the two of them stood in the desert, the tension in the air palpable, neither of them knew what would happen next. Would this battle end in death, or would it bind them together, as ancient law dictated? The harsh winds of Kar-Ren swirled around them, and for the first time in 6 days, Kyle felt a strange sense of hope. In the middle of this desolate wasteland, he had found something, or rather, someone, who might just be the key to his survival. The law of the spear. Kyle's heart was pounding in his chest as the tip of the alien spear glinted in the fading sunlight. The energy of the moment crackled through the desert air. He stood, gripping the weapon with both hands, his knuckles white from the pressure, while the alien woman stared at him in disbelief, her golden eyes narrowed with suspicion. Her spear, meant to kill, was now caught firmly in his grasp, its sharp edges still glinting dangerously. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, neither of them moved. The wind howled around them, blowing sand into the air and shifting the desert landscape. But in that instant, the world seemed frozen. The alien's gaze never left him, and Kyle could feel the weight of her stare, both challenging and calculating, as if she were trying to gauge whether he was a worthy adversary or a mere pawn in some greater game. Kyle's breath came fast and shallow, but his grip on the spear never wavered. He couldn't allow himself to show fear. He had to keep his composure if he was to survive whatever this alien was about to throw at him next. Then the alien spoke, her voice like the cracking of ice against stone. "Release it," she demanded, her words sharp and commanding. She spoke in a language Kyle didn't understand, but her tone was clear. She expected obedience, submission. Kyle's mind raced. What could he do? If he released the spear, would she attack again? Would she spare him? Or was there some other law at play here, something beyond the fight itself? He didn't know, but he wasn't ready to die. Not yet. "Look," Kyle said, his voice hoarse but steady. "I don't want trouble. I don't know what you're after, but I'm just trying to survive here. I'm not your enemy." He knew it was a gamble. But the alien didn't seem interested in listening to words. She moved again, this time shifting her stance, as if preparing for a new attack. Without thinking, Kyle twisted the spear in his grip. The alien let out a sharp hiss, her golden eyes flashing with fury. But it was too late. With one fluid motion, Kyle wrenched the spear from her hand. The alien staggered back, but Kyle wasn't sure if it was from the shock of losing the weapon or from the strange ancient law that was now playing out. Suddenly, everything changed. The alien warrior dropped to her knees, her face a mask of disbelief. Her head bowed as if she were defeated, but her eyes, those piercing, golden eyes, remained locked onto his, full of confusion and reluctant respect. She didn't make any move to attack or flee. Instead, she slowly raised her hands in the air, the universal gesture of surrender. For a moment, Kyle didn't know what to do. His mind was a whirl of questions. What had just happened? Why had she surrendered so easily? Was this part of some elaborate trick? The desert around them remained silent, the only sound the wind whipping the sand across the dunes. "I've caught your spear," Kyle said slowly, still unsure of what was happening. "Now what does that mean?" The alien looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw something that wasn't pure aggression in her eyes. There was hesitation, a flicker of uncertainty. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and tinged with an ancient authority that sent a shiver down his spine. "You have caught it. By the law of the spear, you now hold my fate." Kyle's brow furrowed in confusion. Law of the spear. What's that supposed to mean? The alien's voice grew more solemn, her golden eyes never leaving his. "In the lands of my people, when a warrior's spear is caught, it binds the warrior to the one who holds it. You have caught mine, human. By our law, you are now my master. And I am yours." The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Kyle's mind raced to understand. Was she serious? He had caught her spear, and now, by some ancient law, she was bound to him. What kind of tradition was this? He had read about countless alien customs in the histories, but nothing like this. Was she truly surrendering to him? And more importantly, what did it mean for him? Wait, Kyle said, his voice rising in disbelief. "You're saying that because I caught your spear, you're mine? That doesn't make any sense." The alien woman's face remained unreadable, but there was an almost imperceptible nod. "It is the law of my people. The one who catches the spear is bound to the warrior. Your will is now my command, human." Kyle shook his head, trying to process this strange new reality. "I don't want you as my servant. I'm just trying to find my crew. This whole thing, it wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't come here to own anyone." But the alien didn't seem to care about his confusion. "You do not own me," she replied with an edge to her voice. "But I am bound to you. I will follow your lead. You saved my life when you caught my spear, and now I am yours, as the law commands." Kyle was silent for a long time, the weight of the situation sinking in. It didn't matter that he hadn't asked for this. It didn't matter that he hadn't meant to be part of some alien tradition. He was now bound to her, and there was no going back. With a deep sigh, Kyle looked around at the endless desert landscape stretching before them. He had to focus on survival. He had to find his crew. And this alien warrior, whether he liked it or not, was now part of that equation. "All right," Kyle said finally, his voice firm despite the confusion still swirling in his mind. "We're going to find my crew. We'll get off this planet. But you stay with me, and you'll do exactly as I say." "Got it." The alien warrior nodded, her posture stiff with the weight of the law that bound them together. "I understand, human. Your will is my command." And so, Kyle Reed and the alien warrior, bound by the law of the spear, began their journey together across the hostile landscape of Kar-Ren. Neither of them knew what the future held, but they would face it together, bound by ancient traditions, survival, and the unforeseen consequences of a single moment's decision. The unlikely alliance. The desert stretched out before them, an unforgiving wasteland where the sands shimmered under the harsh twin suns. The alien woman, now bound to Kyle by the ancient law of the spear, moved silently beside him, her presence an unspoken weight on his mind. Her golden eyes were constantly scanning the horizon, her posture rigid and alert. Kyle could feel the tension in the air, thick and almost palpable as they made their way through the hostile environment. They had spent hours trudging through the desert, the temperature fluctuating drastically between the burning heat of the day and the biting cold of the night. Kyle's water supply had dwindled to almost nothing, and he knew that unless they found shelter soon, they wouldn't survive the night. He glanced at the alien woman out of the corner of his eye. She was a strange sight, a mix of beauty and danger, her cobalt blue skin contrasting sharply against the swirling sands. Her long silver hair blew in the wind, and her braided locks shimmered in the sunlight like strands of moonlight. Her spear, still in her possession, was held tightly in her grip, her fingers running over the handle as if it were a part of her. Kyle didn't know what to make of her. He had never expected his situation to take this turn. One moment, he was fighting for his life against the elements. The next, he had an alien warrior bound to him by an ancient law. It was more than he could wrap his mind around. And yet there was something oddly reassuring about her presence, her quiet strength, and the silent promise of protection. "Are we getting closer?" Kyle asked, his voice hoarse as he wiped sweat from his brow. The words seemed weak in the face of the harsh conditions, but he needed something to break the silence. The alien woman, who had not yet revealed her name, paused for a moment, her golden eyes narrowing as she scanned the landscape ahead. Her sharp senses were unlike anything Kyle had ever encountered. She seemed to perceive the world with an awareness that bordered on supernatural. "We are," she said simply, her voice like a soft breeze through the trees. "But there is something you should know." Kyle turned to her, frowning. "What do you mean?" The alien warrior's eyes locked onto his, her expression unreadable. "The desert is full of dangers. Creatures that hunt in the sand. Predators who will follow your scent for miles. You must be careful." She paused, almost as if she were debating whether to continue. "Even I have learned to fear them." Kyle's stomach churned. As if he didn't have enough to worry about already, now there were predators stalking the dunes. It was bad enough that the desert itself was trying to kill them. Now he had to deal with creatures that could be worse than anything he had encountered before. "I can handle myself," Kyle replied, though there was a doubt in his voice. He had faced pirates, dangerous wildlife on other planets, and hostile environments. But this was different. This was an unknown danger, and it was lurking just out of sight. "You may be skilled," the alien said, her voice tinged with a mix of respect and caution. "But even the strongest of warriors are not invincible. You will need to trust me if we are to survive this." Trust her. The idea made Kyle's skin prickle. He barely knew this woman. She was an alien, a warrior, bound to him by a law he didn't fully understand. But as they continued their trek, he couldn't ignore the reality. They were in this together now, and he had to rely on her knowledge of this strange world if he was to survive. Kyle nodded. "All right, I'll trust you." The words tasted strange on his tongue. "But you have to promise me one thing." The alien raised an eyebrow, her golden eyes gleaming with curiosity. "What is it you wish from me, human?" "You have to help me find my crew. If you want me to trust you, that's the deal." Her expression softened slightly. "Your crew is scattered across this planet. It will take time to find them, but I will help. But know this, human," she added, her voice low and serious. "We may find danger in our path. Not just the creatures of the desert, but something far worse." Kyle felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you talking about?" "Something is stirring on this world," the alien said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "a presence older than the stars. The desert hides more than just beasts. There are forces here that none of us can understand. It is not just the heat or the predators we should fear. It is the land itself." Kyle swallowed hard. "And you think these forces could be dangerous?" The alien nodded slowly, her gaze distant. "I know they are. I've seen their signs, and once they awaken, there will be no stopping them. Before Kyle could ask her what she meant, a loud growl echoed through the air, shattering the silence. Kyle's instincts kicked in immediately. He dropped to a crouch, his hand reaching for the gun at his side. The alien, too, reacted instantly, her spear raised, her body tense and ready for action. The growl was followed by a thudding sound, like something heavy moving through the sand. Kyle's heart raced. The sound grew louder, closer. He could feel the tremor in the sand beneath his feet, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. "Get ready," the alien said, her voice cold and focused. "They found us." Kyle's eyes darted around the desert. There was nothing in sight, but the growling sound grew louder. He could feel his pulse racing in his throat, the hairs on the back of his neck rising. He wasn't sure if it was the creature they were running from, or the weight of the unknown forces the alien spoke of. But one thing was clear: survival was no longer guaranteed. The alien warrior moved with fluid precision, taking a defensive stance and positioning herself between Kyle and whatever was coming. Her grip tightened on her spear, her golden eyes scanning the horizon. And then, out of the sand, a massive shape emerged. It was a creature unlike anything Kyle had ever seen. Its body was a mass of writhing tendrils, covered in thick scales, with glowing eyes that gleamed in the dim light. Its massive jaws were open wide, revealing rows of sharp teeth that could rip through metal with ease. "Move," the alien shouted, and Kyle didn't hesitate. They ran, the sound of the creature's growls behind them growing louder with each step. The ground trembled underfoot as the predator closed in, its jaws snapping with hunger. They were on the run, but they couldn't outrun the nightmare that chased them. "Get to the rocks," the alien shouted, her voice commanding and sharp. Kyle's breath came in ragged gasps as they sprinted toward the jagged rock formations ahead. The creature's growls turned into an enraged roar, and Kyle knew they had to move fast. He didn't know how much longer they could keep this up. With one last burst of strength, Kyle and the alien reached the rocks, diving behind them just as the creature lunged, its massive form crashing against the rocks with a deafening thud. For a moment, there was silence, the only sound the pounding of Kyle's heart in his ears. The alien was beside him, her breath heavy, her eyes still fixed on the creature that circled them just beyond the rocks. "You can't outrun it forever," she said quietly, her tone grim. "But you've shown you're willing to fight." Kyle looked at her, his pulse still racing. "I don't know if we can fight that thing." "We will," she said, her voice steely. "And you'll learn that sometimes, human, the only way to survive is to fight." As the creature's growls echoed in the distance, Kyle realized that his battle for survival on this desert world was only beginning.